It's only been a couple of months since I reviewed the last TerraMaster NAS, the 4-bay. You should definitely check that out because a lot of what I say in that review is going to apply to this one. But this is the T12 500 Pro. This is 12 drive bays, but it's a similar loadout in terms of an overkill i7. At least it's overkill for most typical NAS installations. If you like going off reservation, installing your own operating system, or even just using TerraMaster's OS, but loading a lot of plugins for remote access, like Tailscale, VPN, anywhere, you can host your own Netflix off of this, which is pretty amazing. Let's take a closer look at the hardware. Okay, you pick up one of these. You're spending a premium. When you start to spend north of $1,000 on your NAS chassis, it starts to get into territory where it's like, can I build this? Should I build this? And sometimes for DIY and home lab, that can make sense. For a small or medium-sized business, it may not make as much sense. If you pick up more than one of these, for example, you and your buddy can set up an off-site backup buddy system. And the TerraMaster software that's built in will basically let you do that, especially if you add the Tailscale plugin, which is a community plugin, but the Tailscale community plugin plus TerraMaster's backup facility and its replication facility where each of you buy one of these and they replicate offsite, it works shockingly well. And if you look at cloud storage costs, these things will pay for themselves within a year and you get official commercial support for what you're doing. So if something's going sideways, there's someone you can reach out to get help. TerraMaster also has a pretty strong community and user forum, which is interesting. Now the specifications from TerraMaster say up to 264 terabytes, that's with 12 22 terabyte hard drives and up to 64 gigabytes of memory. We're going to put that to the test. I want to see if 96 gigabytes of memory works. In the box, you get a ton of little screws, some rubber mounting feet, 2.5-inch drive screws in case you're going to use 2.5-inch drives, a screwdriver, warranty and registration card. It also comes with a bunch of really thin sheets of black plastic that you can install underneath a hard drive, which alters the airflow characteristic. Quick installation guide QR code. It's strongly recommended to use the officially supported RAM sticks from TerraMaster, otherwise the device may not work stably or correctly. Yes, okay, I am going to use my own crucial 96 gigabytes of memory, but this is an Intel platform, and officially the Intel platform doesn't support error correction, and DDR5 can be a little fiddly, so you can't just run out and buy standardized DDR5 RAM. And just because this particular DDR5 RAM works for me, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will work for you. TerraMaster does actually sell qualified RAM, and if you want a set it and forget it, buy it. Buy it from TerraMaster. It comes with a Cat 6 cable, because it has built-in 10 gigabit, and a power cord. For rear I/O, we've really got nothing super special. We have Type A 10 gigabit ports, a Type C 10 gigabit port, HDMI out, and dual 10 gigabit. And of course our power connection. It is designed to be used in a tower configuration. It is smaller than rack mount. It's got some breather holes on the top and the bottom. 3 fans at the rear, plus there's a CPU fan internally. We'll take a look at that in a second. Let's see what the inside looks like. Now that Intel 1255U, that is technically a mobile processor. Oops. That is technically a mobile processor. That breaks down into 2 P cores and 8 efficiency cores. We took a look at that in the other model TerraMaster that had the 4 3.5-inch bays. And it was very nice having that much computational horsepower in a smaller NAS. Well, this is a larger NAS, and so more drives, more software, more overhead. Dual 10 gigabit interface means that the best you can hope for is a gigabyte per second in and out. But still, it's nice. Also give you a sticker for your drive layout, so if it's drive 3 is bad, because they're not labeled on the front, they're labeled on the sticker, and you can find drive 3 pretty quickly. Internally, it comes with a single TerraMaster label 16 gigabyte SODIMM. This is, like I said, a non-error correcting SODIMM. We have dual 2280 M.2s, which are unoccupied. This appears to be a PCI Express Gen 4 slot. However, it doesn't appear that there's any way to make it externally accessible. That's too bad. This might also not be actually PCI Express. This might be a proprietary interface or something like that. We also got 3 right angle 4-pin headers. They are not necessarily fan headers. I'm not sure. It is a Delta 500 watt power supply. The really nice thing about this is not actually a proprietary power supply, at least on the ATX motherboard side. On the drive interface side, you'd have to get creative hooking it up. This is an 80 plus gold power supply, and Delta is a reputable brand of power supply, so one of the most common failures in NAS is the power supply. It is very nice to see an industry standard, more or less. This is one of the more uncommon ATX power supply form factors, but it is relatively obtainium and relatively standard. In terms of the tray and the drive interface and everything, these are SATA drives, no SAS. So no SAS flash or getting clever and creative like that. This is just a direct interface to the CPU. The trays are also not toolless. It would be awesome if they were toolless. But it did come with a screwdriver and a crap load of screws, so okay, that's fine. We provide quick service and respond to all customer queries within 24 hours. It's a yellow sticker on the box. Neat. Okay, let's get some drives in this, including some flash drives, some M.2. Let's see what we're working with. All right, for our 2280s, I'm going to use 2 Team Group, 1 terabyte. These are the T0C611 T-Create Classic. That's code for these aren't very fast. But that's okay, because it's going to be in a NAS. One other thing you might have noticed, there's a USB 2.0 header on the motherboard, and this is much more accessible than the USB 2 header on the other model TerraMaster NAS we took a look at a couple of months ago. The BIOS, even though there are BIOS options, TerraMaster has not really locked down the BIOS, so you can go into this just like it's a computer and configure it. Even when you configure other boot options, it will want to try to boot from this USB disk. So what I usually do is pop the USB disk out and just tape it inside the unit, because if you ever need warranty service or anything like that, you got to reset it back to its normal configuration and make sure that the problem you're having actually occurs with the configuration that you have there with the USB flash drive. So if you have your own low-profile flash drive, you can boot from that. That is no problem. But it can be a little tricky to coax it to boot from something else. In case you're wondering, can I run Proxmox on this natively? Yeah, pop the USB disk out and install, use your 2280s to create a RAID 1, BTRFS RAID 1 or an LVM RAID 1 volume, and then use that as your boot volume, and then you can use all the mechanical storage in the world for your data volume. And that does actually work on this platform. Just keep in mind, 2 performance cores and 8 efficiency cores. That's not a ton of horsepower. I would have loved to have seen more performance cores, but that's not bad. It's surprisingly quiet even before I add any drives. And because I've changed the memory, it will take a little while for it to boot up. DDR5 memory training takes forever. It beeped once to let us know it was okay. There you go, everything is as expected. 96 gigabytes of memory, our Alder Lake 12th Gen 1255U, and our 8+2 core configuration. Now let's take a quick look at the TerraMaster software. This is really not a lot different than other models of TerraMaster software, and it's really not a lot different than the last video if you saw that. So you could just skip this chapter if you already saw it in the other video. Okay, setting up your NAS is pretty easy. If you don't know the IP address, you can log in locally and get it with IP-4 space A. But you can also just use the TerraMaster utility, or you can check your router or whatever. You get this screen, it's like, hey, it's fully loaded, but it's like using incompatible or suboptimal disk can greatly increase the risk of slow response. Disk failures, yeah, that's caution. Automatic initialization is about to begin. Oh no, it's gonna wipe my drives. So I don't know why I wanted to use. Let's use them all. Oh, I can't because they're different sizes. Mixed sizes. I should put two more 8 terabyte drives in there. Let's see. Once that gets done, you're gonna get a screen like this that's like, hey, the NAS is gonna reboot on its own, and if you're watching the HDMI connected monitor, it's rebooting. You normally don't need a monitor on your NAS at all. Like I think that goes without saying. You probably knew that. And here we are after rebooting. Oh my gosh, I have to agree to things. By the way, I've been drinking a lot. See, because you're inebriated, you can't agree to things. And here's where you can set a username and password. Then once that's done, you get logged in. This is what you get. You can install a backup application. This is basically the NAS software. And this is also what you abandon if you want to run something else. And I would encourage you to take a look at TerraMaster's software, like the software package they put together. It's pretty reasonable for most people. In the recommended apps, there's USB copy. You can plug in a USB external hard drive, and so you can back up your NAS onto the hard drive, part of your 3-2-1 backup strategy. There's a lot you should do when you embark on the whole home server thing, but what I'm here to do is to run a virtual machine. Virtual machines, virtual tasks. One of the things that comes up a lot there is Docker, and this has support for Docker out of the box. So it's like, oh, there's a Docker icon, I'll click on that. It's like, okay, let's go ahead and hit install on that. It does give you some more information about Docker engine and also Portainer. These are two things that I've covered specifically, and it's like, this is the easy button. It really is. So we're going to install both of those things. And a lot of our other tutorials and videos that we have on level 1 talk about Docker and Portainer and setting up containers for that. It's pretty straightforward. There's a lot of content out there on doing really cool stuff. Like the first low-hanging fruit thing you should set up is Pi-hole. In the app system with TerraMaster, there are officially sanctioned TerraMaster apps that are open source. So like TerraMaster's dev team has looked at them, blessed them, kicked the tires, maybe made some minor tweaks, and they're cool. But there's also community apps, which I think is also awesome, and we'll take a look at that in a second. But Apache Tomcat, so if you have the unfortunate situation of having to develop Java software and you need Tomcat, you can install Tomcat. I'm sorry, I'm just making fun. You get ClamAV for scanning files for malicious content as they hit your NAS. Docker, which we already installed. Cloud Sync, so if you want to back this up to Amazon S3 or your friend over a VPN, you can do that. Joomla, don't install Joomla, but Joomla is a content management system and dynamic DNS services. You can also use this as a log server, multimedia server. Now the community apps thing, while we're waiting on the virtual machine thing to install, these are the popular apps and the newest apps from the TerraMaster community. So there are a lot of people using TerraMaster NAS solutions that are very happy with them. Now, TerraMaster does also monetize their community. So again, you can DIY all of this yourself with Portainer and with virtual machines. But if you want to, do the membership thing, there is different membership levels, and there are some things to watch out for here in terms of like, wait a minute, I want to actually download this. So, anywhere from €9 a year to €49 a year. Now I registered for the community. I haven't paid a dime. And one of the things that I really like about this is that the people that participate in the community, you can give them money. So like PearDrop, which is an airdrop thing that'll turn your NAS into, it's like, oh, I can just airdrop files to my NAS. And you can give this person money, which is amazing. And you should. Installed FFmpeg manually by just going to app installations, choosing the APK and installing it, and then boom, there you go. Now FFmpeg is going to be available. FFmpeg is for transcoding. It's a command line. Everything uses it. Literally everything. Tailscale is also available in the community. This is like... Aww. Tailscale is also available in the community, but if you download too much from the community site, that's when it asks you to pay, or wait 5 days. So, yeah. If you are going to install Proxmox, there's a couple things you should need to know. Hit us up in the forum, but here's your quick how-to. First off, make a bootable USB. I use Ventoy. Ventoy sometimes has problems. Ventoy is like a multi-boot thing where you just copy the ISO to a USB stick, and then you can pick which thing you want to boot from in a menu. Mostly it works. Sometimes on devices like this, it doesn't want to work graphically or something else happens. They use the terminal install. The BIOS is really picky. So the TerraMaster OS, this USB stick, or TOS, they've modified the BIOS and they really want you to boot off of this first, but it's not enough to just take this out. The system will seem like it hangs on boot. If you're suspect of that's what's happening in the configuration that you've got on this because you're going off script, and you go into BIOS and you can manually boot from Proxmox after the installation. Here's what you got to set in the BIOS. First, you got to come to your NVMe options. Usually when you install an OS, these things can be set automatically, but this thing just ignores that. So you have to go to the boot options, set it to boot off of the UEFI OS first, and then there's a second menu where you pick which UEFI OS. Because I did a RAID 1 installation, it shows up on both of my tcreate NVMe, and so I've picked both of those in the menu, with Linux boot being the second one. The other option in this BIOS is the fast menu. This is the menu that TerraMaster has added to the BIOS to make it really quick for their technicians to pick the options that they want. And so you want to disable TOS boot first, because I think that's this option. And you also seem to want to disable the option that is quiet boot. Like, you have to do all of these things. And then you can't save and exit. You have to save and reset, because save and exit does something different than save and reset. I'm not really sure about that. But once you've done all that, you should get the Proxmox boot menu. Again, if you're troubleshooting, is it a BIOS problem or is it an OS installation problem, use the manual boot selection in the boot menu in BIOS. And if you go to that and you pick the EFI option and everything boots normally, it's just a BIOS configuration problem. If those options don't do it for you, let me know in the forum. Now, the second thing that I want you to think about is the Proxmox backup server. Yeah, Proxmox has their own backup operating system. Guess what runs like a dream on this platform? You can just install the Proxmox Backup OS operating system on this, and then this becomes a pretty attractive little target for doing all your multiple backups. And I'll also give you a hint. With the dual 10 gig interface, yeah, you can only back up at 1 gigabyte per second. But instead of trying to do something fancy where you've got a combined 10 gig interface or something like that, set up 2 6-disk storage pools and set up multiple servers to use the multiple interfaces. And so one group of servers can use one 10 gig interface, and one group of servers can use the other 10 gig interface, and also groups of disks. Because when you've got 2 groups of disks, then the IOs don't overlap with one another, and the system will be overall much faster, because the thing that kills IOPS on mechanical hard drives is random IO. So as a Proxmox backup appliance, this is pretty good. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing system integrators and other folks like that pick up systems like this and pre-install Proxmox OS as part of their MSP solutions or something like that, because it's basically everything you need to do that and not really any of the things that you don't. Although I would recommend a minimum of 32 gigabytes of memory when you are going to run the Proxmox Backup OS. Now, in terms of 10 gigabit networking throughput performance, well, the throughput performance is basically identical to the other model. Really what you're getting is 4 bays versus 12 bays. With the advent of drive capacity the way that it is, for home laptop use or home media server, I think the other model, TerraMaster, is a little bit better deal. But if you're a small or medium-sized business and you're wanting high-capacity backup replication appliances, then this could be worth the cost, because it's an appliance and it's quiet enough not to annoy people if it's in the same office as they are when they're working. And 12 hard drive bays, well, I mean, 264 terabytes. That's a lot of capacity. And the memory is upgradable with DDR5, assuming that you get DDR5 that is perfectly compatible with the platform, which is not trivial. Like, you don't want to just buy a random DDR5 kit and hope that it works. If you do use custom memory that's not from TerraMaster, you probably want to boot from a USB stick and run memory testing overnight. Something like MemTest 86, something like that. Make sure that the memory doesn't have any errors, because you can have little subtle errors. And if the memory has little subtle errors, you're going to have a bad time with your NAS adventures. Something a little bit more high-end with actual error-correcting memory would be positive. If you are thinking about running Proxmox on this, and you're thinking about, oh, let's run ZFS, it would be nice if this platform supported error-correcting memory for the purposes of ZFS. It's not the end of the world with ZFS if you run ZFS without a memory correction capability, but I think that gets you square into the territory of I'm kind of DIYing it and off-labeling it. And so if something goes sideways, you will be responsible for the fact that it went sideways. Whereas if you buy the TerraMaster NAS and stick with the TerraMaster operating system and add plugins to it like Tailscale and everything else, the responsibility is largely on them for you to have a good experience and that everything actually is working correctly. I was actually kind of surprised the performance of this is more or less identical to the 4-bay unit. But this is 12 bays and 500 watts. At the wall, it's consuming something like 9 watts with no drives attached to it. If you fully load this thing, then it's going to be idling somewhere more in the 100 watt neighborhood. It depends entirely on the drives that you add. I mean, it can be anywhere from 3 to 4 watts per drive with the drives being active, all the way up to on the order of like 9.5 watts per drive, give or take, which would put this thing more on the worst case scenario end of like 200 watts. And this i7, when it is fully loaded, will consume a lot of power. Like the whole system going north of 100 watts with a reasonable drive configuration is not unusual. But for the amount of computation you get, that's a pretty good deal. Oh, and in case you're wondering what the full hardware loadout looks like, here is the output of LSPCI from Linux. Shows you that we're working with our Marvell the Quantia chipset for 10 gigabit. So 2 10 gig controllers. Does have a nice heatsink for those on the inside. It's not Intel X550 or anything like that. So these won't perform quite as well as an Intel X550, but I get the job done. So that's been a quick look at the TerraMaster T12 500 Pro. I modeled this level 1. If you have any questions or you want to see anything in particular applied to this, let me know. I'm going to give this a try as a Proxmox cluster member and see how that goes. 2 performance cores and 8 efficiency cores. It could do it. It could get the job done. It could do the forbidden router role. If you're not familiar with the forbidden router, be sure to check out our other videos because we've done a lot. It's basically running your virtual machine router ingress internet filter as a virtual machine on Proxmox or whatever host operating system you want to run it on, which is neat and a lot of fun. It's good to sharpen up your skills, you know. All right, I'm signing out. You can find me in the Level 1 forums.